Well, kia ora koutou. I'm Mike Bedford, and I'm New Zealand's only postgraduate qualified specialist in health and wellbeing for the ECE and care sector. I've got nearly 30 years experience with the sector, a Master in Public Health and a PhD, both focused on the health and wellbeing of children in ECE and care, and substantial experience in the establishment of running public health programs for the sector. I've estimated that I've made something in the region of 1,500 visits to ECE centres, representing about 600 or 700 centres right across the spectrum. Now, I'm just going to ask you to bear with me as I read from notes here, because I'll just do that to make things more concise. I've had many conversations with teachers over the past 3 or 4 years who have left centre-based ECE and care, some of whom have gone to home-based. Not one of the teachers that I've spoken to cited pay as the reason they left. Teachers' pay is very poor, it's inexcusable, but it wasn't pay that teachers cited as the reason for leaving. They said that's not what drove them out of the sector. In every case, the teachers I spoke to said it was the conditions that they and the children were subjected to. In some instances saying, I can't condone this. Unless the ministry attends to the appalling conditions that are damaging our children and teachers in what has become a low-quality childcare system, we will not see any slowing of the loss of teachers from the sector, let alone a reversal. Following 3 Official Information Act requests to the Ministry of Education, on the 16th of June, the Ministry removed 2 claims on its website, one stating that we had 98% compliance with regulations, and the other stating that we had among the best standards in the world for ECE. Now, both of these statements were categorically false, but the worst thing about it is that reality sits at the opposite end to those statements. We have ample information to say that we have poor compliance with regulations, but the regulations themselves compare poorly with those of many other jurisdictions in the world. So it's essential that the ministry stops painting a false picture of quality in the sector and faces the reality that it is our poor quality system that is driving teachers out, and with that, damaging New Zealand's children. So there's 2 things that the ministry must attend to with utmost urgency. And the first is our regulations for space per child, indoors and outdoors, our ratios and controls on group size. Consistent with the case made by the Teachers Advocacy Group to the Parliamentary Regulatory Review Committee, I would state, giving a public health expert opinion, that our minimum space per child indoors and our ratios for children under 3 can only be described as state-funded child abuse, while our outdoor space per child would reasonably be described as state-funded deprivation. These are appalling standards that cannot be anything but damaging to the children and teachers that are subjected to them because of the stress caused by overcrowding and inadequate ratios. Now, inadequate ratios and unstable staffing both contribute to attachment disorder, to insecurity and anxiety and neediness, and those conditions point directly to some of what we're seeing in our adolescents. They can affect children for the rest of their lives. It's very serious. These extremely poor, and by international comparison, poor conditions are only made worse by the abusive conditions generated by large group sizes, completely inappropriate to this age group. While the regulations haven't changed substantially in 3 decades, the reason that we have such an appalling situation now and so many children in bad situations is that the commercialisation of the sector has seen some businesses focus on money rather than children, exploiting our poor minimum regulations for maximum profit, and that includes some of our biggest providers. No service that cares about the well-being of children or teachers should operate any of minimum space per child indoors or outdoors, or our minimum ratios for children under 3 years old, and no government agency or government official should be condoning it. Now, having said that, I want to acknowledge that we have people in the sector who are giving heart and soul for the children, and centre owners who are taking no profit at all, trying to do the best for children, but they are being penalised for doing so. This leads to the second thing that the ministry must address with absolute urgency, and that is our perverse licensing system that acts directly against quality and is therefore an agent of abuse of children and teachers. The existing licensing system encourages maximum crowding, minimum ratios, as well as other aspects of deprivation or abuse that constitute a reason for teachers leaving the sector. And this is aside from the abuse of employment conditions that relate more to the teachers themselves, but still affect children, such as a lack of non-contact time, lack of breaks, which means you have exhausted, tired teachers. That impacts on children as well. In the same way, the licensing and funding system penalises services that try to operate to better than minimum quality. So it's a financial cost to do the right thing for children. This perverse situation was echoed in the pay parity deal that favoured the worst quality centres while placing the best quality centres in some instances on the verge of collapse. The ministry has been provided with a solution to the licensing system in the form of quality-based contracting, but has not engaged meaningfully with this to this point. So the ministry must do two things to act on this. You need to urgently establish a working group to change ratios, space per child, and group size with qualified public health advice and adequate teacher representation on that group, contrary to the frankly commercially rigged advisory group that the ministry currently operates with. You need to consult with organisations like ECE Reform on solutions to the licensing system, and in particular, with ECE Reform, talk to us about the perfectly workable and far more sensible quality-based contracting model. So if the ministry doesn't do these things, then this government will be holding the collapse of the ECE sector in this term of government. So I want to ask you to engage with us in good faith. And I'm putting that because we haven't had good faith to date, but we are willing to come to the table if you engage in good faith and are prepared to look at the alternative models and to urgently address our minimum standards. Thanks for listening.